I watched my girlfriend stare lovingly at another man, touching and flirting with him right in front of me, so I walked away and planned my brutal revenge. Sup Reddit, my name is Nathan, and I'm 29 years old. What I'm about to tell you started with something as simple as a dress, but it ended up unraveling 5 years of what I thought was a solid marriage. It was a Tuesday evening when everything began to shift, though I wouldn't understand the significance until much later. I was sitting at our kitchen table, half focused on some quarterly report for work, when I heard Victoria's footsteps coming down the stairs. When I looked up, something inside me just froze. She was wearing this blue dress I'd never seen before. It wasn't that she didn't look good. She looked incredible, actually. But the dress was tight in a way that felt new, in a way that somehow wasn't meant for me. There was something different about how she carried herself in it, like she was wearing it for someone else entirely. What really caught my attention wasn't just the dress itself, but the way she looked at herself in the mirror near our entryway. She stood there for what felt like forever, adjusting the fabric, checking her reflection from different angles. She had this expression I didn't recognize, like she needed confirmation from someone who wasn't there, someone who definitely wasn't me. "Going somewhere?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Too casual, actually. I could hear the slight crack in my tone, the weight of a question that felt heavier than it should have been. Victoria glanced at me with this glazed-over expression, like she had to mentally scroll through her brain to remember who I was and why I might be asking. "It's Morgan's birthday," she said, grabbing her coat from the closet. Ah yes, Morgan, her coworker who seemed to throw about 6 birthday parties a year. I'd lost count of how many celebrations this woman apparently needed, but Victoria never missed one. I didn't say anything else. I just nodded and went back to pretending to work on my laptop, though the numbers on the screen might as well have been hieroglyphics for all the sense they made to me now. She left without kissing me goodbye, something that would have been unthinkable just a few months earlier. She used to kiss me before going to check the mailbox, for crying out loud. 2 hours passed, then 4. Midnight rolled in like fog, quiet and sticky with tension I couldn't quite name. I wasn't even pretending to do anything productive anymore. I just sat there in the kitchen with my phone on the table, completely untouched. She didn't text me updates like she usually did. I didn't call to check in like I normally would. I don't know why I held back. Maybe because deep down, I didn't want to hear whatever answer she might give me. Then, around 1:30 in the morning, I saw the sweep of car headlights across our living room window. She came through the front door smelling like someone else's cologne, a scent that was distinctly masculine and completely unfamiliar. I didn't say a word to her, and she didn't say anything to me either. She walked right past me like I was invisible, like I was just another piece of furniture in our home. I listened to her footsteps going up the stairs, heard our bedroom door close with a soft but definitive click. The next morning, she was already gone when I got up. No note on the kitchen counter, no pot of coffee brewing, not even her usual empty mug sitting in the sink. It was like she'd become a ghost who occasionally used our house as a way station. When I checked our bed, I realized she hadn't slept next to me either. Her side was completely untouched, the covers still perfectly smooth. Out of curiosity, or maybe growing paranoia, I checked the security app on my phone. The timestamp showed she'd come home at exactly 1:46 a.m. What I didn't know then was that this wasn't going to be a one-time thing. This was going to become our new normal, and I was about to discover just how far my wife had already drifted away from our marriage. What happened that Tuesday night wasn't an isolated incident. It became a pattern that would stretch on for weeks. The disappearing acts became routine. Victoria would come downstairs wearing dresses I'd never seen before, each one seeming carefully chosen for someone who wasn't her husband. The half-lies were spoken with such practiced confidence that I almost started believing them myself. "It's work," she said one evening, shrugging on her coat with the same casual indifference I'd seen that first night. "We have to stay late for the quarterly review." Her tone was so matter-of-fact, so rehearsed, that it felt like she'd been practicing the words in the mirror. I said nothing. I had become an expert at watching her walk out the door like I was watching a stranger leave my house. There was no kiss goodbye, no "see you later," no acknowledgement that I existed beyond being a witness to her departure. The silences in our house grew thicker each day. We moved around each other like polite roommates who happened to share the same space but had no real connection. I started to feel like I was living with a ghost, someone who looked like my wife but had somehow been replaced by a person who found my presence barely tolerable. Then came the night I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. It wasn't planned, and I'm not proud of what I did, but desperation makes you do things you never thought you'd stoop to. She left around 7 p.m. with another vague excuse about work obligations, And 10 minutes later, I grabbed my keys and followed her. Her car wasn't hard to track. Victoria had always been predictable in some ways. She parked a block or two away from wherever she was actually going, like some kind of half-hearted spy who thought she was being clever about covering her tracks. That night, her destination was some trendy-looking bar with massive glass windows and neon lights that made everyone inside look like they were performing in a music video. I parked across the street, turned off my headlights, and sat there in the dark with my engine humming quietly. That's when I saw her. Victoria was sitting at a high-top table, laughing with him. A man I'd never seen before, but who clearly knew her well. She touched his wrist when he handed her a drink, a gesture so intimate and familiar that it made my stomach clench. Then she touched his shoulder when he leaned in to say something, and he must have been funny because she threw her head back and laughed. It was that deep, genuine laugh she used to save for me. The same laugh we'd share when we watched old sitcom reruns in bed. Both of us pretending we weren't falling asleep, but too comfortable to move. Seeing her give that laugh to someone else felt like watching a thief walk away with something irreplaceable. But what really broke something inside me was what happened next. She brushed something off his shirt. Probably nothing. Maybe a piece of lint or a crumb. It wasn't even a dramatic gesture, just her fingers grazing the fabric of his button-down. But it was so casual, so natural, so intimate that I felt something split open inside my chest like an old injury tearing wide. It wasn't rage I felt in that moment. It wasn't even sadness exactly. It was something worse. Confirmation. Pure, undeniable confirmation of what I'd been trying not to believe for weeks. She never touched me like that anymore. When was the last time she'd laughed with her whole body in my presence? When was the last time she'd looked at me with the kind of warmth and attention she was giving this stranger? When was the last time she'd made room in her voice for genuine affection when she spoke to me? I sat there in my car with the headlights off and the engine humming, my heart feeling like it had turned to stone. I watched them talk, watched them drink, watched her completely forget that I existed. She was animated in a way I hadn't seen in months, leaning forward when he spoke, smiling with her eyes, completely present in a way she never was with me anymore. I didn't go into the bar. I didn't confront her or cause a scene or demand explanations. I just sat there and watched my wife cheat on me in real time. Maybe not physically, not yet, but emotionally she was already gone. She was already someone else's. Eventually, I couldn't take anymore. I started the car and drove around aimlessly until the gas light blinked on. I pulled over at some random parking lot, turned off the engine, and sat in the complete darkness. I wasn't crying and I wasn't screaming. I was just existing with this new knowledge. Like someone had handed me a brick and said, "This is your new life. Carry it." When I finally made it home, I went straight to our bedroom and opened Victoria's closet. 2 dresses were missing from their usual spots. One blue, one black. Both were outfits she never wore around me, clothes I'd apparently never been important enough to see her in. I sat on the edge of our bed, on her side, and tried to breathe in any trace of her presence. Nothing. No lingering perfume, no familiar scent. She hadn't actually slept there in days, maybe weeks. I don't know how long I sat like that. But when I finally stood up and looked at myself in the mirror above our dresser, I said out loud, "You're not crazy." Because that's what she'd been making me feel like for weeks. Paranoid, insecure, jealous over nothing. But I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being unreasonable. I was just right. And sometimes being right is the most painful thing in the world. The next morning, everything was sickeningly normal. Victoria came into the kitchen wearing an oversized hoodie and leggings, her hair tied up in a messy bun like she was just another tired wife getting ready for another ordinary day. Like she hadn't spent the previous night touching another man's face, laughing at his jokes, giving him the version of herself that I used to know. She moved around our kitchen with mechanical precision, starting the coffee maker, dropping bread into the toaster, scrolling through her phone with the same mindless routine she'd had for years. Not a single word to me. Not even a glance in my direction. I might as well have been invisible, just another appliance taking up space in her morning routine. And I played along with the whole charade because that's what you do when your world is splitting open and you haven't figured out which side to fall on yet. I sat there drinking coffee I couldn't taste, watching her thumbs dance across her phone screen with practiced familiarity. She smiled once while reading something, and I recognized that expression immediately. It was that private, guilty, delicate curve of her mouth. The kind of smile that's meant for someone who isn't in the room. Someone who definitely wasn't her husband, sitting 3 feet away from her. I thought you had to work late again today, I said, my voice coming out quieter than I'd intended. She didn't even blink, didn't pause her scrolling or look up from her screen. I do, she replied flatly. That was it. 3 words, delivered with the emotional warmth of someone reading the phone book. Cold, practiced, final. In that moment, I realized something that made my stomach drop. She thought I'd never say anything. She was so secure in my silence, so confident in my willingness to swallow whatever story she fed me, that she didn't even bother to lie well anymore. She'd gotten lazy with her deception because she believed I was too weak, too trusting, or too afraid to call her out. But I wasn't silent. Not inside, anyway. Inside, I was a storm waiting to hit the coast, and she had no idea what was coming. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before in our entire relationship. Something I'd never even considered. I opened her laptop. The betrayal of going through her personal things should have felt wrong, should have made me pause, but something fundamental inside me had cracked. Trust had become a rotting structure in our marriage, and I was done pretending it wasn't about to collapse entirely. The messages were all there, not even hidden or deleted, just minimized in her browser like they were nothing more than casual conversations. She hadn't even bothered to cover her tracks properly, which somehow made it worse. It meant she either thought I was too stupid to find them or too spineless to look. Had fun last night, read the most recent message. Next time we don't stop at just drinks, came the reply. Miss your hands already. The sender's name was Bradley. Of course it was. I scrolled through the thread, watching weeks or maybe months of my marriage dissolve in real time. There were inside jokes I didn't understand, nicknames that made my skin crawl, photos I couldn't bring myself to open. But the worst part wasn't the flirtation, or even the obvious physical intimacy they'd shared. The worst part was reading what she'd written about me. She'd turned me into a character in their love story, the boring, predictable husband who just doesn't get it anymore. She told him I was emotionally unavailable, said she felt alive with him in ways she never did with me. My hands were shaking as I read her complaint that I'd become distant, that I didn't notice her anymore, that I was too fragile to handle the truth about how unhappy she was. According to Victoria's version of events, I was the problem. I was the reason she'd been forced to seek attention elsewhere. And then, like a cherry on top of this acid-laced sundae, I found the message that made me want to put my fist through the screen. I'm going to tell him soon, but he's too fragile. I don't want to hurt him. Fragile. She thought I was fragile. I closed the laptop slowly and sat back in my chair, staring at the wall while the silence in the room took on an almost physical weight. It felt like the air itself was asking me what I was going to do with this information, how I was going to handle having my worst fears confirmed in black and white. So I waited for her to come home. When she walked through the door that evening, I didn't look at her, didn't get up from my spot at the kitchen table. I just said, "We need to talk." She froze for just a second, long enough for me to see the flash of panic cross her face. Then the performance began. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting her purse down with exaggerated care, injecting just the right amount of faux concern into her voice. She even had the nerve to furrow her brow like I was being unreasonable for wanting to have a conversation with my own wife. I didn't say anything at first. I just turned the laptop toward her, the browser still open to their message thread. Open betrayal, displayed in neat little text bubbles that told the story of how little our marriage meant to her. Her face drained of color so fast it was like watching a power outage. But just as quickly, she recovered, and I watched her slip into damage control mode. "Oh my God, you went through my laptop!" she snapped, her voice sharp with manufactured indignation. She crossed her arms and stood there like she was the victim, like I was the one who had violated some sacred trust. I didn't answer her accusation about going through her laptop. I just stared at her, watching this woman I'd shared a bed with for 5 years transform into someone I didn't recognize. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "What the hell, Nathan?" she said, her arms still crossed, standing there like she was the one being violated. The audacity of it was breathtaking, getting caught cheating and somehow making herself the victim in the span of 30 seconds. "You're cheating," I said finally. My voice came out barely more than a whisper, but it echoed in the space between us like a gunshot. The words hung there, undeniable and final. She rolled her eyes, actually rolled her eyes at me, like I was being dramatic about discovering my wife's affair. "It's not cheating, we haven't even—" She stopped herself mid-sentence, realizing her mouth was betraying her faster than her body ever could. "Too late," I said, standing up from my chair. The damage was done, and we both knew it. "So what have you done, Victoria?" I asked, my voice getting steadier with each word. She didn't answer, just stood there opening and closing her mouth like a fish gasping for air. I watched you with him, I continued, each word deliberate and cold. At the bar, I saw everything. The way you looked at him, the way you touched him. You followed me? She asked, her eyes going wide. But it wasn't shame I saw there, it was offense. Offense that I'd had the audacity to discover what she was doing behind my back. Yes, I said calmly. I followed you and I saw my wife wrap herself around another man like I was already dead. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like she was struggling to find the right lie to tell me. Nathan, it's not what you think. Don't, I cut her off before she could finish. Don't insult me. Don't humiliate me and then expect me to swallow more lies. She turned away suddenly, starting to pace around the kitchen like a trapped animal. And that's when the real Victoria started to leak out from behind the mask she'd been wearing. You know what? Maybe if you'd been paying attention, I wouldn't have needed to find attention somewhere else, she snapped, whirling around to face me. There it was. The venom she'd been hiding. The real reason she thought this was somehow justified. Bradley listens to me. Bradley sees me. You walk around like a ghost, Nathan. Like some shell of the guy I married. And yeah, maybe I wanted to feel alive again. Maybe I deserved that. I stared at her as she continued pacing, breathing heavily like she was the one who'd been wronged. She was actually trying to make this my fault, trying to convince me that her affair was some kind of reasonable response to my supposed neglect. You don't deserve anything, I said quietly. Not from me. She stopped pacing. The words hit her like a physical blow, and for a moment I saw something crack in her expression. She wasn't expecting that response. She'd expected me to fight back, maybe even cry. She'd expected the fragile husband she'd described to Bradley. Not this. What does that mean? She asked, her voice smaller now. It means I'm done, Victoria. Her eyes finally cracked then. The performance was over, and she was staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time in months. You're really going to throw this all away? I almost laughed. The sheer audacity of the question was staggering. You already did, I said simply. She stood there with her arms limp at her sides, her eyes empty now, like she was finally realizing that her safety net, my willingness to forgive, to overlook, to make excuses for her, was gone. I turned and walked out of the room without another word. No yelling, no slamming doors, no dramatic exit. But something inside me closed so hard and so completely that I swear I felt the air in the house change. I didn't sleep that night. Again. But this time, it wasn't because I was waiting for her to come home. And it wasn't because I was drowning in uncertainty. This time, I lay there in the dark staring at the ceiling with surgical clarity, going over every moment in my head like it was evidence in a courtroom. Her smiles that never reached me anymore. The new underwear she'd bought and claimed was just for fun. The way she'd started locking the bathroom door when she showered. Every lie had been a brick, and I'd let her build me into a room with no exits. But now I was standing in that room alone, with a suitcase full of evidence and a wife sleeping down the hall who only looked like the woman I'd married. At 6 a.m., I packed a bag. Not a dramatic suitcase full of everything I owned, just enough for a few days. A couple of shirts, my laptop charger, toothbrush. The essentials for someone who is finally ready to leave. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter, right beside the coffee pot she never touched anymore. It sat there catching the morning light, a small gold circle that had once meant everything and now meant nothing at all. I didn't leave a note. If she wanted answers, she could find them in the same place I had, hidden between the lies she'd told so easily to both me and Bradley. I grabbed my keys and walked out the front door of the house we'd shared, closing it quietly behind me like I was leaving for work on any other ordinary day. Except this time, I wasn't coming back. I drove to my brother Tyler's place 2 towns over. He lived in one of those quiet neighborhoods where people actually knew their neighbors and kids still rode bikes in the street without their parents panicking. When I showed up at his door at 7 a.m. with a duffel bag and what must have been a 1,000-yard stare, Tyler didn't ask a single question. He took one look at my face and said, "Spare room's made up." That's the thing about Tyler. He's always had this uncanny ability to tell when things are broken just by looking at your face. He can read disaster in someone's posture, detect the exact moment when a person's world has shifted off its axis. He didn't need explanations or backstory. He just knew I was done with whatever I'd been carrying, and he made space for me without hesitation. By noon, Victoria had started texting. The first message was simple. "Where are you?" 10 minutes later, "Seriously, we need to talk." An hour after that, this is childish. I didn't respond to any of them. I sat in Tyler's guest room, staring at my phone like it was a bomb that might go off if I touched it wrong. Each message felt like another attempt to drag me back into her orbit, to make me feel guilty for having the audacity to leave after discovering her betrayal. By 4 p.m., she escalated to calling. I watched my phone buzz against the nightstand, her name lighting up the screen like an accusation. I let it ring until it went to voicemail, then deleted the message without listening to it. At 5:13, she texted again. If you think this is going to fix anything, it won't. No apology. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. No remorse or regret. Just blame, wrapped up in the implication that I was the one being unreasonable. Even in her attempts to get me back, she couldn't stop making herself the victim of my overreaction. That evening, Tyler fired up the grill on his back deck while I sat there with a beer I had no intention of drinking. The sun was setting behind the trees in his backyard, painting everything in soft orange light that should have felt peaceful, but somehow just made me feel more hollowed out. His wife, Lisa, came outside once, saw my face, and gave me the kind of soft, knowing look that women give when they can tell a man's world has imploded. She didn't say anything, didn't try to fix it with words or advice. She just acknowledged the wreckage with her eyes and went back inside to give us space. You going to tell me what happened? Tyler asked, flipping a burger patty with the casual ease of someone who knew I'd talk when I was ready. So I told him everything. From the blue dress that started it all to Bradley's hands on my wife's skin. From the messages on her laptop to the way she'd tried to make me the villain in her cheating story. I laid it all out like evidence at a crime scene, and Tyler listened without interrupting. When I finished, he didn't say anything at first. He just nodded slowly, turned off the grill, and looked at me with the kind of certainty that comes from seeing something clearly from the outside. You're not going back? He said finally. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same confidence he'd used to tell me the sun was setting or the beer was getting warm. I didn't answer because I didn't have to. We both knew he was right. That night, I finally slept. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't lying awake wondering where Victoria was or what she was doing or who she was with. I wasn't replaying conversations in my head or trying to decode the meaning behind her latest lie. I just closed my eyes and fell into the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that comes when you stop fighting a battle you've already lost. I dreamed of silence. Peaceful, undemanding silence. Not her voice echoing in my head with its carefully crafted explanations. Not my own doubts screaming at me to give her another chance. Just quiet. Beautiful quiet. That didn't ask anything of me except to exist in it. The next morning, she sent me a wall of text. A carefully constructed message that tried to thread the needle between confession and manipulation. Designed to make me feel sorry for her while never quite admitting full responsibility for what she'd done. I didn't mean for it to go this far, it began. You pulled away from me first. I was lonely. Bradley just made me feel seen. We didn't do anything physical until recently. I was going to tell you. And then, like she was playing her ace card, she added, but I never stopped loving you. I nearly dropped my phone when I read that last line. She was using the word love like it was some kind of magic charm she could dangle in front of me, expecting me to come crawling back because she'd invoked the sacred concept of our feelings for each other. That was the moment I realized she didn't actually want me back. She wanted the comfort of my silence, the convenience of my presence, the reliability of a man she could betray and still count on to be there when she needed him. She didn't want Nathan the husband. She wanted Nathan the safety net. I didn't reply that day or the next. The silence between us stretched like a canyon, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I was comfortable living on my side of it. Then Victoria did something that showed me just how far she was willing to go to rewrite the narrative of our marriage. She called my mother. My mother, bless her heart, had always seen the best in people. She'd raised me to believe that most problems could be solved with honest conversation and good intentions. So when Victoria called her crying, spinning some story about how I had run off after a fight and was being irrational, my mom bought it completely. According to Victoria's version of events, nothing had actually happened with Bradley. I was just reading too much into things and had blown some innocent friendship completely out of proportion. She painted herself as the confused, hurt wife whose husband had clearly lost his mind over nothing. My mom called me in a panic later that afternoon. I had to sit there, 29 years old, explaining to the woman who had taught me about loyalty and commitment that her daughter-in-law had turned our marriage into a performance. That Victoria was still acting, still playing the role of the misunderstood wife even as she manipulated my own family into taking her side. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was sabotage. Victoria wanted me to doubt what I'd seen with my own eyes, what I'd read in black and white on her laptop screen. She was trying to gaslight me through my own mother, to make me question my sanity and crawl back to her apologizing for having the audacity to be hurt by her affair. But I wasn't that man anymore. The Nathan who would have second-guessed himself, who would have wondered if maybe he really was overreacting, was gone. I knew what I'd seen, and I knew what I'd read, and I wasn't going to let her rewrite history just because she'd gotten good at lying. I called a lawyer that afternoon. I found Teresa Martinez through a Google search and a few phone calls to friends who'd been through divorces. She had a reputation for being a straight shooter who didn't coddle her clients or waste time on wishful thinking. When I walked into her office, I wasn't the broken man Victoria probably expected me to be. I was done. Done with the lies. Done with the manipulation. Done with being treated like I was too stupid or too weak to recognize what was happening in my own marriage. I scheduled our first meeting for the following week, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just surviving. 3 days later, Victoria showed up at Tyler's house. She didn't call first, didn't text to ask if it was okay. She just knocked on the door like it was Sunday brunch and not the aftermath of the wreck she'd caused with her own hands. Lisa opened the door and immediately called for me, her voice carrying the kind of urgency you'd use to announce that there was a rattlesnake on the porch. I walked into the front hall, and there she was. Victoria in her softest sweater, no makeup, hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked like she was auditioning for the role of the repentant wife, trying to project vulnerability and sincerity. I didn't say anything at first, and neither did she. Her eyes scanned the space behind me like she couldn't quite believe I had somewhere to go that didn't include her. Like the idea of me existing independently was a concept she'd never seriously considered. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere without being overly dramatic. I turned to Tyler and Lisa, who were standing off to the side watching this unfold like referees who'd rather be anywhere else. Lisa gave me the smallest nod, not encouraging me to go, just acknowledging that this was my decision to make. Tyler folded his arms and waited. "Outside," I said finally. We stepped onto the porch, and the cold November wind immediately cut through both of us. Dry leaves were rustling across the lawn, and somewhere in the distance, a dog was barking. Victoria stood there with her arms wrapped around herself, like the chill was something completely foreign to her. "I read your messages," I said, cutting straight to the point. No warm-up, no small talk, no pretending this was anything other than what it was. She flinched but quickly composed herself. "I figured you did. You lied to me for months." "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, like that somehow made it better. Like her consideration for my feelings was supposed to give her some kind of moral pass for the betrayal. I actually laughed. It came out short and bitter, surprising both of us. "You think saying that makes it better? Like it gives you some kind of justification for what you did?" She looked away, staring out toward the street like the answer to our problems might be written on the pavement. "I didn't plan for this to happen. Bradley and I, we just clicked." "Clicked," I repeated, taking a step toward her. "Victoria, you were married. You didn't just click with someone, you decided to, over and over again. Every time you answered his messages, every time you lied to my face, every time you put on a new dress and left me behind." Her lip quivered. Whether it was real emotion or just part of the performance, I couldn't tell anymore. "You don't understand what it was like," she said, her voice getting smaller. "Coming home to someone who stopped seeing me. You were always working, always tired. You didn't even notice when I cut my hair." "You cut it half an inch!" I snapped, my composure finally cracking. "You were begging for a reason to feel neglected. You turned me into the villain so you could run off and feel justified about it." Her eyes flared with something that looked like genuine anger. "So it's all my fault? You think you've been this amazing husband? You haven't touched me in months. You come home from work, stare at your laptop, and act like I don't exist." "Because I felt it slipping away," I said, my voice getting calmer as hers got more heated. "I felt you going cold, pulling away from me. I tried to reach out, but you weren't there anymore. You were already somewhere else, already with him." We stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of 5 years hanging between us like a bridge that was finally collapsing. People drove past Tyler's house, going about their normal evening routines. Somewhere down the street, that dog was still barking. It was surreal. This quiet, ordinary moment happening in the middle of the complete destruction of everything we'd built together. "I don't want to lose everything we built," she said finally, her voice soft and pleading. "Please." I stared at her. This woman I'd shared a bed with, made plans with, dreamed about growing old with. She was asking me to save something that she'd already destroyed, to resurrect a marriage she'd murdered in a series of text messages and secret meetings. "You already burned it down," I told her, my voice steady and sure. "You're standing in the ashes asking me where the house went." Her expression completely shattered then. The carefully constructed mask of vulnerability fell away, and for a split second I saw raw panic in her eyes. She reached for my hand, probably some instinct left over from when we used to comfort each other, but I pulled away. And then she said the thing that ended it for good, the sentence that made me realize there was no coming back from this. "You're really going to throw away 5 years over a mistake?" "Mistake?" I said the word slowly, letting it hang in the cold air between us. "Victoria, forgetting your anniversary is a mistake. Locking your keys in the car is a mistake. What you did was a campaign. It was deliberate, sustained, and calculated." Her mouth opened and closed, like she was trying to find words that could somehow undo what she'd just said. But there was nothing left to say. She'd just revealed exactly how she saw our entire situation, as me overreacting to her little mistake. She stepped back like I'd physically struck her, finally understanding that this wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a fight we were going to have and then make up from later. This was the end. And it had been the end from the moment she decided that our marriage was worth less than her excitement over some other man. I didn't say goodbye. I opened Tyler's front door, walked inside, and left her standing on the porch. She knocked once, then twice, her fists hitting the wood with increasing desperation. Then silence. I watched from the upstairs window as she walked back to her car. She moved slowly, like she was still expecting me to come running after her, to change my mind at the last second. But I didn't, and she didn't look back when she drove away. Tyler came up later with a glass of bourbon and didn't say a word. He just handed it to me and sat down in the chair by the window. For the first time in days, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, that was still a long way off, but peace. Because now, finally, it wasn't my fault anymore. Now, finally, I knew with absolute certainty that I was leaving her and that she'd given me every reason in the world to do it. The next few days passed in a strange kind of stillness. Not calm exactly, but a hollow quiet like a room after loud music suddenly stops. I stayed at Tyler's, worked remotely from his kitchen table, ate whatever Lisa put in front of me, and stared at emails I couldn't quite focus on. Everything around me was moving, but I felt suspended in some kind of emotional amber. Then Victoria started showing up everywhere I went. At first I thought it was coincidence, but it quickly became clear that she was following me, trying to engineer accidental encounters that would force me to talk to her. The first time was at the coffee shop down the street from Tyler's house. I went in for a simple black coffee, and there she was sitting at the corner table, flipping through her phone like she just happened to be there. When she saw me, she looked up with this bright, fake smile like we were old friends running into each other by chance. "Didn't think I'd see you here," she said, her voice artificially light and casual. Her eyes were wide with performed surprise. I didn't reply. I turned around and walked right back out of the coffee shop, leaving my order at the counter. The second time was at the grocery store 2 blocks from Tyler's place. I saw her just inside the entrance, standing near the produce section like she'd suddenly developed an urgent need for bananas in a neighborhood she'd never shopped in before. This time, she tried to actually talk to me. "Nathan, please!" she started, but I didn't stop walking. I grabbed what I needed and left through a different exit. The third time, she didn't even bother with the pretense of shopping or getting coffee. She just parked outside Tyler's house and sat there with her engine running, her hand tapping nervously on the steering wheel like she was rehearsing what she wanted to say to me. I didn't go outside. I watched her from the window for nearly 20 minutes until she finally drove off. That night, she texted me, "We need closure. Please meet me." Closure. That word again. The favorite buzzword of people who destroy things and then ask you to help them clean up the emotional mess. She wanted me to participate in some kind of mutual healing process, to have a mature conversation where we could both feel better about the wreckage she'd created. I didn't respond. I'd already given her more attention than she deserved. The next morning, Lisa handed me an envelope with a concerned expression. "She dropped this off," she said, her eyebrows pinched with worry. "Didn't even ring the bell. Just left it on the porch." Inside was a handwritten letter. Several pages of Victoria's careful script trying to explain herself, trying to make me understand her perspective, trying to pull me back into the orbit of caring about her feelings and her experience. I didn't read it. I folded the pages in half and shoved them into the back of Tyler's junk drawer, right next to the expired coupons and old takeout menus. She wanted my attention, even if it was just attention to her pain and regret. But she didn't get to have that from me anymore. That version of Nathan, the one who would absorb her emotions and try to fix her problems, was gone. A few days later, I had my first official meeting with Teresa, my lawyer. She was exactly what I'd hoped for. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that told me she'd seen every variation of marital breakdown and wasn't interested in wasting time on false hope or wishful thinking. I sat in her office and laid out the entire story. The emotional distance that had been growing for months, the lies, the night I followed Victoria to the bar, the messages I'd found on her laptop, the confrontation, and her continued attempts to manipulate the narrative even after I'd left. Teresa listened quietly, taking occasional notes but mostly just watching my face as I spoke. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me with the kind of clarity that comes from years of helping people navigate the legal aftermath of broken relationships. "You've already made your decision," she said simply. "What you're asking me to do is just paperwork." And she was absolutely right. The hard part wasn't ending the marriage. The hard part had been accepting who Victoria really was. For years, I'd built her up in my head as this ideal partner. Victoria, the loving wife. Victoria, the brilliant companion. Victoria, the person who laughed at my dumb jokes while we cooked pasta together on Sunday nights. But none of that version of her mattered anymore, because she was also the same woman who had looked me in the eye for months while planning a second life behind my back. She was the woman who had turned our marriage into a performance while auditioning for a different role entirely. I signed the initial divorce papers that day. It felt cold and clinical, nothing like the dramatic scenes you see in movies. No tears, no big speeches about love and loss, just pen on paper and the quiet sound of a life being legally dismantled. But as I walked back to my car in the parking garage, something inside me let go. Not all at once, more like a corner or a piece of the weight I'd been carrying finally broke free and fell away. That night, Victoria called me. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Maybe I wanted to hear if she'd finally found some genuine remorse, or maybe I just wanted to confirm that she was still the same person who'd been trying to manipulate me back into her life. She sounded tired when she spoke. Not crying, not dramatic, just completely drained. "You really filed?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, and for a moment I wondered if she was going to try another angle, another approach to make me reconsider. "So that's it," she said finally. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch between us, thinking about everything that had led us to this moment. Then I said, "That's what you chose." And for once, she didn't argue. She didn't plead or try to spin the blame back onto me. She didn't launch into another explanation about how lonely she'd been, or how I'd driven her to seek attention elsewhere. She just whispered, "Okay," and hung up. In that silence after the call ended, I knew something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't chasing anymore, wasn't trying to win me back, or convince me I was making a mistake. Because she finally understood that I was already gone, and that all her manipulation and guilt trips couldn't bring back a man who had stopped existing the moment I found those messages on her laptop. The morning after she hung up on me, I woke up without that crushing weight in my chest for the first time in what felt like months. There was no tight jaw from grinding my teeth all night, no instinctive urge to check her location on my phone, no imagined arguments playing on repeat in my head like a broken record. Just silence. Clean, honest silence that belonged entirely to me. I got out of bed, took a long shower, cooked scrambled eggs, and actually read the news instead of just staring at the headlines while my mind raced through scenarios and conversations. For the first time since this whole nightmare started unraveling, I caught myself humming while I made coffee. It was something stupid and light, a tune I didn't even recognize. But it was mine. That moment was completely mine, free from her, free from Bradley, free from the mess they'd created together. It was the first purely peaceful moment I'd had in longer than I could remember. I didn't hear from Victoria for 4 days after that call. Then came a voicemail that lasted 3 minutes. Her voice shaking, but no tears, no apologies either. Just a monologue about memories she thought might pull me back. She talked about our trip to Charleston 2 years ago, the weekend we'd spent at that cabin upstate, The time we'd almost missed our flight because I'd insisted on getting pancakes at that little diner by the airport. She was trying to reframe the picture, trying to weaponize nostalgia to make me remember why we'd fallen in love in the first place. But what she didn't understand is that you can't use the good times as leverage after you've poisoned them. That's not how memory works. Her voice on that recording didn't sound like my wife anymore. It sounded like a stranger wearing the skin of our shared past, trying to convince me that the woman who'd betrayed me was the same person who'd laughed with me in that diner. I didn't delete the voicemail, but I didn't replay it either. I just let it sit there in my phone like a monument to everything we'd lost. That same day, I got an unexpected message from one of Victoria's coworkers. It was from Morgan, ironically enough, the same Morgan whose endless birthday celebrations had provided Victoria with cover for so many of her lies. "I'm sorry," Morgan wrote. "I didn't know how bad things had gotten between you two. I just want to say that you deserved better than what happened. We all saw things we probably should have questioned earlier. She changed a lot in the past few months." I stared at that message for a long time. It wasn't much, but it was something. Proof that I hadn't imagined the changes in Victoria, that her transformation from loving wife to distant stranger had been visible to other people. It meant I wasn't crazy, wasn't reading too much into things, wasn't the paranoid husband she'd tried to make me believe I was. Somehow, that validation from someone who'd witnessed our relationship from the outside meant more than anything Victoria had said to me in months. Later that night, Tyler asked if I wanted to grab a drink. We hit this quiet spot on the edge of town, one of those old establishments with wooden floors that creaked when you walked, and a bartender who probably knew your dad back in the day. The kind of place where you could sit for hours without anyone bothering you or trying to make conversation you didn't want to have. We sat at the bar barely talking, just sipping whiskey and letting the night settle around us like a comfortable blanket. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that comes when two people understand each other well enough that words aren't always necessary. After about an hour, Tyler turned to me and said something that hit me like a punch to the gut. "You know, I hated her for you long before you realized you needed to." I turned to look at him, genuinely surprised. "Why didn't you say anything?" He shrugged, taking another sip of his drink. "Because you weren't ready. And if I'd told you back then, you would have defended her. You would have made excuses and convinced yourself I was wrong. And he was absolutely right. I would have. That's the thing about love. Real love. The kind that makes you vulnerable and hopeful and stupid. It makes you blind to patterns and red flags and cold shoulders. It makes you fill in the gaps with hope instead of facts. It makes you protect someone even when they're the one systematically tearing you down. But I wasn't that man anymore. The Nathan who would have rushed to Victoria's defense, who would have explained away her behavior and convinced himself that everything was fine, was gone. He died somewhere between finding those messages and watching her blame me for her affair. We sat in silence after that revelation, letting the whiskey do its quiet magic while classic rock played softly in the background. On the drive home, I looked at the houses lining the street, lit windows, warm porch lights, families eating dinner or watching TV together, normal people living normal lives. And I realized something important. I wasn't jealous anymore. I wasn't aching for a life that looked whole and perfect from the outside because I'd already lived inside that illusion. I knew how quickly something that appeared solid could rot from the inside out. How easily a marriage could become a performance where only one person knew they were acting. The next morning, my lawyer called with an update. Victoria's attorney had responded to our initial filing, and the news was both surprising and somehow perfectly fitting. "She is willing to cooperate," Teresa told me. "No contestation, no demands for mediation, no request for counseling. She wants a clean, quick divorce." Translation: Victoria knew she had nothing to stand on. No leverage, no way to spin this situation into something that would generate sympathy or give her negotiating power. She wanted out clean and fast, with as little scrutiny as possible. But weirdly, her quick surrender made me angrier than if she'd tried to fight me. Because it meant that our 5 years together really had meant nothing to her. The moment she realized I wasn't going to beg her to come back, wasn't going to accept responsibility for her choices, she folded like a house of cards. No counteroffers, no request to try therapy, no last-ditch efforts to save what we'd built together. Just complete capitulation. Like I'd been a lease she'd forgotten to renew rather than a husband she'd promised to love and honor. I walked out into Tyler's backyard after that call, into the cold November sun, and sat on one of those plastic deck chairs with my hands folded in my lap. The reality was finally sinking in. She was gone. Not leaving, Not threatening to leave, not halfway out the door, completely, definitively gone. And for the first time since this nightmare began, that felt like something I could build from rather than something I needed to survive. The divorce process moved faster than I'd expected, probably because there wasn't much left to fight over. We didn't have kids, didn't own a house together, and the only major asset was the consulting business we'd started together 3 years earlier. When Victoria's lawyers sent over their terms, even that had been simplified. She was agreeing to walk away from the business entirely, signing over her stake without asking for compensation. According to her attorney, she didn't have the emotional bandwidth to stay tied to something they'd built together. The irony was suffocating. She'd had the emotional bandwidth to carry on a months-long affair, to construct an entirely separate life with Bradley, to lie to my face every single day while living a double life. But she didn't have the bandwidth to face the consequences of what she'd destroyed. I didn't even flinch at her terms. Let her walk away. Let her take her carefully curated social media presence and her new haircut and disappear into whatever version of herself she thought Bradley would love. I had no interest in holding on to anything she touched, anything that would keep us connected even in a business capacity. The days were getting colder as we moved deeper into November. I decided it was time to move back into my own apartment across town, a place I hadn't lived in since before Victoria and I got married. I'd kept it as a rental property, but my tenant had moved out the month before, so it was sitting empty and waiting. The apartment still smelled faintly of old carpet and industrial-strength lemon cleaner, but it was mine. The walls were bare and the furniture sparse, but when I sat down in the living room, I could breathe properly for the first time in months. No perfume lingering in the air that belonged to someone who'd stopped loving me. No secrets sitting in drawers like unexploded bombs. No lies humming under the surface of every conversation like low-voltage static that made everything feel dangerous and unstable. One evening, while I was setting up my computer in what used to be our shared office, I accidentally stumbled across an old photo of Victoria and me on my Google Drive. I hadn't meant to open it. I was just trying to send a work file and clicked the wrong folder. It was a picture from that cabin trip upstate she'd mentioned in her voicemail. I had my arm around her and she was leaning into me with her whole face turned toward mine, smiling like I had the sun in my pocket. I remembered that moment clearly. I'd thought then that she was my home, that she was the safest place in the world for me to exist. Looking at it now felt like watching someone else's life unfold, not because I didn't remember it, but because I no longer believed in the story it was supposed to tell. How long had she been pretending when that photo was taken? Had the lies started before that trip or after? That question clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. I wanted to delete every photo, every memory, every trace of what we'd been together. But memories don't have off switches. They cling to you. They fester in quiet moments. They morph and change shape depending on what you learn about the person who created them with you. Later that night, I got a message that I absolutely didn't expect. It wasn't from Victoria this time. It was from Bradley. Didn't mean for things to go down like this, he wrote. Thought you should know I didn't pursue her. She came to me. I stared at that line for a long time, trying to figure out what to make of it. Was it an apology? An excuse? A pathetic attempt to absolve himself of responsibility for participating in the destruction of someone else's marriage? I didn't reply. There was nothing he could say that would matter at this point. He wasn't the villain in this story, not really. He was just the option Victoria had reached for when she stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as furniture. A convenient placeholder who provided stability while she auditioned for a more exciting life. The choice had been hers, every single time. She'd chosen to protect her little thrill over our shared life. She'd chosen flattery over loyalty, chosen attention over real love, chosen lies over truth. Every single decision along the way had been hers to make, and she'd consistently chosen the path that led away from our marriage. Bradley was just the destination. If it hadn't been him, it would have been someone else eventually. Because the problem wasn't that some other man had swept my wife off her feet. The problem was that my wife had been looking for someone to sweep her away, and now she was alone with her choices. Or maybe not alone. Maybe she and Bradley were together now, going out for dinner and talking about how tragic it all was, how misunderstood they were, how their love had been worth the wreckage. Maybe they'd convinced themselves they were star-crossed lovers whose connection justified everything they'd done. Let them have that narrative. I was finally past the point of caring who she was with or how she justified her actions to herself. In the weeks that followed, I started getting messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Word was apparently getting around that Victoria and I were getting divorced, and suddenly, everyone had an opinion or a story to share. "Hey man, just saw your name on some business paperwork changes," one college friend wrote. "What happened with you and Victoria?" "Saw Victoria's social media is completely wiped," another one said. "Are you guys okay?" "She always seemed a little off to me," came from someone I'd worked with briefly. "Glad you're out of that situation." It was fascinating and disturbing how many people had apparently seen cracks in our relationship, but had never said anything. Maybe they thought I wouldn't believe them. Or maybe they thought I was too deep in the relationship to hear criticism of my wife. Maybe they were right on both counts. But it didn't matter now. Every message was another small piece of confirmation that I'd done the right thing, that walking away wasn't weakness or giving up too easily. It was the only strength I'd had left. Then one afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up to my apartment building. I got a notification that there was a package for me, which was strange since I hadn't ordered anything. When I went downstairs to get it, I saw Victoria's handwriting on the address label and nearly sent it straight back without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside the box were a few items. Some books that had been mine but had ended up at our house, a hoodie I'd been wondering about, a small framed photo from our wedding wrapped carelessly in paper towels, like she didn't even care if the glass broke. And tucked at the bottom was a note written on plain white paper in her careful script. "Didn't know what to do with these. Figured you might want them. Hope you find peace." She'd signed it with just her first initial. No love, no always, no attempt at meaningful closure. Just a cold, careful V, like she was ending a business correspondence. I threw the note in the trash immediately. The next day, I dropped the hoodie off at a Goodwill donation center. But I kept the wedding photo, not because I missed her or wanted to remember what we'd had, but because I wanted to remember what it looked like to believe someone completely. I wanted to remember what it had cost me to trust without reservation. The final divorce hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in early December. It was one of those cold, gray mornings where the sky looks like it's pressing down on the world, threatening snow that never quite materializes. The courthouse was exactly as sterile and bureaucratic as I'd expected. Nothing dramatic, nothing that acknowledged the magnitude of what was happening. Just paperwork. A judge who'd probably processed dozens of similar cases that week, and two people who used to be everything to each other sitting on opposite ends of a room waiting to be legally untied. Victoria was already there when I arrived, wearing a neutral-colored outfit that was probably carefully chosen to project respectability and composure. Her hair was straightened, her makeup minimal, and her expression was that blank mask I'd seen more and more frequently in the final months of our marriage. The look she wore when she wanted to appear completely unaffected by whatever was happening around her. She didn't look at me even once during the entire proceeding, and I found that I didn't care. The woman sitting across the room might have shared my last name and my bed for 5 years, but she wasn't my wife anymore. She hadn't been my wife for months, maybe longer. This hearing was just making it official. The clerk called our names and ushered us through the process with the efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. The judge barely looked up from his paperwork as he read through our agreement, stating the terms out loud like we were settling a property dispute rather than dismantling a life we'd built together. When he brought down the stamp with a quiet, deliberate thud, there wasn't a gasp or tears or any of the drama you might expect. Just the sound of finality, clean and complete. It was over. 5 years of marriage, of shared dreams and inside jokes and Sunday morning pancakes, reduced to a case number and a file that would get stored in some basement archive. We stood up and gathered our things like we were leaving any other appointment. I didn't expect her to say anything. We hadn't spoken directly since that night on Tyler's porch. But as I was turning to leave, she surprised me. "Nathan," she said softly, just loud enough for me to hear. I stopped but didn't turn around completely, just looked back over my shoulder. "I meant some of it back then," she said, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been genuine regret. I turned slowly to face her completely, looked her dead in the eyes for what I knew would be the last time and said, "Then you should have fought for it." She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something else, but I didn't wait to hear what it might be. I walked out of that courthouse and into the December wind without looking back, because the truth was that I didn't need to hear what she'd meant, or when she'd meant it, or how sorry she was about any of it. She'd had every chance to mean it when it counted, and she'd chosen not to. I got in my car and sat there in the courthouse parking lot with my hands on the steering wheel, waiting for some kind of emotional reaction to hit me. But there was no shaking, no numbness, no overwhelming flood of relief or sadness. Just quiet. just the simple reality that it was finished, and I could finally stop carrying the weight of a relationship that had been dead for months. Without really thinking about where I was going, I started driving. Not home to my apartment, not back to Tyler's place. I just drove. I found myself taking familiar routes through the city, past places that held pieces of our shared history. I drove past our old neighborhood, the one where we'd rented that little house with the broken front gate, and the landlord who never fixed anything. Past the park where we used to talk about getting a dog we never ended up adopting. Past the coffee shop where we'd had our first real fight and made up an hour later over croissants and bad apologetic poetry I'd written on a napkin. Then I stopped at a red light and looked over at the passenger seat, and I realized something that hit me like a revelation. It didn't feel empty anymore. For months, every car ride had felt hollow, like I was missing some essential piece of myself. But now, sitting there alone, it felt free. I was free. Not just from Victoria, but from the version of myself that had tolerated her gradual withdrawal. Free from the man who'd swallowed his doubts, who'd ignored the warning signs, who'd waited for her to come back when she was already gone. That guy was done, finished, buried under the weight of evidence that could no longer be ignored or explained away. A few days later, I did something that felt both small and monumentally symbolic. I changed my phone number. Not out of fear that Victoria would contact me, but out of a desire for complete control over my own life. She didn't get to pop back into my world 6 months from now with a "just thinking of you" message. She didn't get to linger in the corners of my phone or my mind, waiting for moments of weakness when nostalgia might make me forget why I'd left. She was done, blocked, buried. That night I made a list. Not a bucket list or a set of goals for my new life, just reminders to myself about what I would never tolerate again. Being treated like an option instead of a priority. Being lied to and then made to feel guilty for asking questions. Being loved only when it was convenient for someone else. Being gaslit into thinking that basic respect was negotiable. And at the bottom of the page, I wrote something that felt like the most important lesson I'd learned from the entire nightmare. I don't need closure. I need clarity. And finally, I had it. The strange thing about healing is that it doesn't announce itself with fanfare or dramatic moments of breakthrough. It doesn't show up one morning with banners and trumpets and some deep cinematic monologue about moving on and starting fresh. It comes in pieces. Quiet moments that slip past unnoticed until suddenly you realize you didn't think about her all day. Small victories that accumulate like interest, compounding into something that eventually feels like peace. One morning, I woke up and realized it had been over 2 weeks since I'd said Victoria's name out loud. The apartment was starting to feel like mine instead of just a place I was staying temporarily. I bought a new couch that was completely different from anything we'd owned together. Modern and clean where our old furniture had been vintage and cluttered. I put up a couple of prints on the walls, nothing fancy or expensive, just images that made me feel calm when I looked at them. I started cooking again, really cooking, not just heating up takeout or eating cereal at 2 a.m. while staring at my laptop screen. I picked up jogging, something I'd never done consistently before. Not because I was chasing some dramatic post-divorce transformation or trying to become a completely different person, but because I liked the feeling of movement. I liked the beat of my shoes on the pavement, the way the wind cut across my face, the way I could leave every thought behind with every step. There were moments when I'd catch myself laughing at something stupid on television and realize that I hadn't thought about Victoria in hours. Those moments felt golden, like small gifts I was giving myself without even trying. Then came a phone call I didn't expect. It was from Victoria's mother, Ellen. I recognized the number but let it go to voicemail, not sure I was ready for whatever conversation that might entail. When I listened to the message later, her voice sounded tired and a little shaky. "Nathan, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I don't know what Victoria told you about everything, but I know you didn't deserve what happened. You were good to her. You really were good to her, and I know that. I hope you find someone who appreciates what you have to offer." I sat there holding the phone long after the message ended. Ellen had always liked me. We'd shared recipes over holiday dinners, joked about cheap wine at family gatherings, even cried together once on the back porch after Victoria's father had said something unnecessarily cruel, and no one had called him out on it. And now she was the one apologizing to me for her daughter's choices. It meant Victoria had lost more than just me in this whole mess. She'd lost the version of herself that people could respect and root for. The next day, I called Ellen back. We talked for about 10 minutes, and she didn't defend Victoria or ask for details about what had happened. She just said, "You deserved better than what she gave you." and then told me she hoped I'd find someone who didn't make love feel like a constant battle. After I hung up, I realized something else. Victoria couldn't lie and manipulate her way through people's lives without leaving a trail of ruined trust behind her. Eventually, no one follows that trail back to offer support or second chances. Eventually, you end up alone with your choices and the person you've chosen to become. Later that week, I went out with some friends from work. Just a casual dinner at this Italian place downtown. Nothing dramatic or therapeutic, just normal people having normal conversations about normal things. But I caught myself actually being present in the moment, laughing at Rob's weird obsession with trivia night, making fun of Sarah's inability to eat pasta without getting sauce on her shirt. It felt easy and light in a way that social interactions hadn't felt in months. One of the women there, Ava, asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. She was careful to clarify that it wasn't necessarily a date, just two people who discovered they had similar taste in books and bad jokes. I said yes. Not because I was ready for anything serious, not because I was trying to prove I was over Victoria, but because I wanted to say yes. And that felt like progress, the simple desire to spend time with someone new, to have conversations that weren't weighed down by the history of betrayal and disappointment. After dinner, walking back to my car, I passed a bookstore and saw a copy of one of Victoria's favorite novels in the window display. It was some literary romance she'd always said changed her perspective on love and had tried to get me to read multiple times. I actually laughed out loud standing there on the sidewalk. The idea of Victoria lecturing anyone about love, about what it meant or how it should work, was now so absurd it barely seemed real. She'd become an expert on romance novels while systematically destroying the real relationship she'd been living in. That night, I opened my laptop and deleted the last folder of pictures I'd been holding onto. Not out of spite or anger, but because I didn't need to carry those images around anymore. I didn't need to hold on to evidence of who we'd been together, because who we'd been had nothing to do with who I was becoming. Victoria used to tell me I was too sensitive, too soft, that I took things too personally. But she never realized that those weren't weaknesses. They were exactly the things that had kept me human, while she was turning herself into a storm of excuses and distractions and half-truths. I'd loved her fully and honestly, and that wasn't something I was ashamed of. It was what set me free. She'd become just a chapter now, a badly written one with a sudden, chaotic ending that left more questions than answers. And I didn't need to reread it to understand how the story ended. I stood at the shoreline last weekend, breathing in the salt air and feeling more like myself than I had in over a year. Tyler had dragged me out of town for a few days, said I needed to breathe air that didn't carry the scent of old memories and failed relationships. We drove out to this cabin near the coast where his family used to vacation when we were kids. No cell reception, no internet, no noise except the sound of wind carving its way through the pine trees and the endless crash of waves that had been beating against that shore long before either of us were born and would continue long after we were gone. The second night there, I walked out alone while Tyler and Lisa played cards inside by the fireplace. The sky was that deep, purple color you only get right after sunset, the kind of color you don't really appreciate when your head is filled with someone else's noise and drama. As I stood there with my toes in the sand and cold wind cutting across my face, I realized something I hadn't been willing to admit to myself until that moment. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Victoria, not at Bradley, not even at myself for taking so long to see what was happening right in front of me. The grief had already come and gone in waves over the past few months. The anger had burned hot and then cooled to nothing. The betrayal still echoed from time to time, but it no longer sat on my chest when I woke up in the morning. It no longer whispered poisonous questions in my ear during quiet moments. It was just there now, like an old scar that had faded to the point where you sometimes forget it exists. Painless and no longer in need of constant attention or care. She'd texted me again last week from yet another new number. I don't know how she got my contact information. Maybe someone gave it to her, or maybe she found it through some desperate digital investigation I didn't want to think about. The message was short and predictable. I know I don't deserve it, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here. I stared at it for a while, letting it sit in my inbox, not because I was tempted to respond, but because I wanted to make sure I felt absolutely nothing when I read it. And I did feel nothing. No anger, no sadness, no curiosity about what she might want to say to me. I archived the message without responding. Didn't block the number, didn't send back some cutting reply, didn't feed the ghost of our relationship with any kind of attention. Because she didn't deserve a response. And more importantly, I didn't need to give her one. There's no closure to be found in conversations with people who only want to soothe their own guilt rather than heal the wounds they've caused. And I wasn't in the business of helping Victoria feel better about the choices she'd made. You see, there's a strange kind of power in letting go completely, in not needing revenge or perfect comeuppance or justice served on a silver platter. There's power in not crafting the perfect speech in your head, in not hoping they suffer or regret their choices or come crawling back with apologies. There's power in moving forward so completely and so definitively that they're left talking to a version of you that no longer exists, while you're already building something new somewhere they can't reach. So if you're reading this and you're in the middle of your own version of this nightmare, if you're lying awake dissecting every conversation, every missed sign, every moment when you should have known something was wrong, I want you to hear this clearly. It's not your fault. Their choices are not a reflection of your worth. Their disloyalty doesn't mean you weren't enough. Their lies don't rewrite your value as a human being or as a partner. You will breathe again without feeling like someone's sitting on your chest. You will stop checking your phone every 5 minutes, hoping for a message that explains everything. You will laugh, and it won't feel forced or hollow. You will forget what their voice sounds like in your dreams. You will find peace, not because they handed it to you or gave you permission to have it, but because you earned it by walking away from someone who didn't deserve the gift of your presence in their life. As for me, I don't hate Victoria anymore. I don't love her either. I don't miss her, or wonder what she's doing, or hope she's learned something from all of this. I just remember her now, the way you remember a lesson that cost you something important, but taught you something even more valuable. I remember what she taught me. That loving someone doesn't mean saving them from the consequences of their own choices. That sometimes silence is the most powerful response you can give. That the most loyal thing you can do for yourself is walk away quietly, completely, and finally from someone who has proven they don't deserve your loyalty in return. The man she left behind when she chose Bradley over our marriage. He's not waiting for her anymore. He's not hoping she'll realize what she lost or come back with the perfect apology or magically transform into someone worthy of the love he gave her. He's moved on. He's building something new. And he's never, ever looking back. TLDR. Found out my wife was having an emotional and physical affair with a coworker. She tried to gaslight me and make it my fault. I left, filed for divorce, and learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away completely and build a better life without someone who didn't appreciate what they had.